My name is Claire, and I'll never forget the night my husband destroyed me in front of everyone, our friends, my colleagues, even his boss. It was supposed to be a celebration, the kind of corporate dinner where promotions are quietly hinted at, alliances cemented with handshakes, and reputations polished like silver under the chandeliers. But instead, it became the night I chose truth over silence, the night I raised my glass, spoke one single line, and brought everything crashing down. I can still hear the sound of the boss's hand slamming the table, the gasps from the other guests, the clink of glassware that seemed to shatter right along with the image of the perfect marriage I had pretended to hold. My husband Daniel went pale, his face folding in on itself as though the walls of his carefully constructed world had caved in. But before we get to that moment, before the chaos and the fallout, you need to understand how we got there. How the man I once trusted more than anyone else became the same man who would humiliate me so deeply I had no choice but to destroy him with the truth. The evening had begun with promise. I had put on my navy blue dress, the one Daniel always claimed made me look respectable, but approachable. He liked me to be an extension of his image, polished calm, a supportive wife who laughed at his jokes but never outshone him. The restaurant was one of those old establishments downtown, heavy with mahogany paneling and waiters in crisp white jackets. The smell of seared steak and buttered vegetables clung to the air, mixing with the faint tang of expensive wine. Daniel had been in high spirits as we arrived, greeting his boss, Mr. Whitmore, with a hearty handshake that was just a little too firm, a little too eager. "Glad you could make it," Sir Daniel said. "Claire's been looking forward to this all week." I smiled politely, though in truth I'd been dreading it. These dinners always felt like theater, Daniel performing as the ambitious golden boy, me cast as the loyal, smiling spouse. And yet, I'd rehearsed my part as well. Smile, nod, never contradict him. We were seated at a long, polished table, Daniel at Mr. Whitmore's right side, me just beside Daniel. Across from us were a few other executives and their spouses. The clatter of cutlery and the low hum of conversation created a backdrop that made everything feel rehearsed, staged, inevitable. The first course arrived, lobster bisque, creamy and rich. I lifted my spoon ready to eat when Daniel cleared his throat and launched into one of his stories. He was always telling stories, usually ones that made him look clever and others foolish. "This reminds me of Claire's little mishap at our last dinner party," he began, his voice carrying just enough to ensure the entire table heard. My stomach dropped instantly. I hadn't expected him to do this, not here, not tonight. "She thought it would be a good idea to try a soufflé," Daniel continued, chuckling. "But of course the poor thing collapsed, right as she pulled it out of the oven." He paused for effect. "So we ended up serving pancakes instead." Imagine, sir, a soufflé turned into pancakes. Laughter rippled around the table. Not cruel exactly, but polite, indulgent, the kind of laughter people give to signal that they're on your side. My face burned, though I forced a smile. "It wasn't that bad," I murmured, but Daniel pressed on. "Oh, it was," he said with a grin. "Claire can be a bit clumsy in the kitchen, bless her heart. But hey, at least she tries, right?" More chuckles. I felt the sting of humiliation settle in my chest like a weight. It wasn't just the story, it was the tone, the dismissiveness, the way he used me as a prop to elevate himself. And it wasn't the first time. Mr. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, swirling his wine. "Every man needs a wife who tries, Daniel. The effort is what counts." I swallowed hard, nodding politely. Inside, though, my thoughts churned. Try as though my role was simply to stumble along behind him, grateful for the chance. The rest of the evening followed the same rhythm, Daniel telling stories that painted him as the sharp, capable rising star, while reducing me to the bumbling, well-meaning spouse. My small mistakes became punchlines. My achievements were ignored or dismissed. When the main course arrived, filet mignon with red wine reduction, Daniel raised his glass for a toast. "To the future," he said, his voice booming. A bright one thanks to the mentorship of men like Mr. Whitmore and the patience of my wife who puts up with me chasing it. The table laughed again, glasses clinking. My hand trembled as I lifted mine, the stem of the glass cool against my skin. Something in me snapped. I realized that if I didn't speak now, I would be forever trapped in the role he had written for me. I raised my glass higher, my voice steady, though my heart pounded. To the future, I said, meeting Daniel's eyes, and to the truth that eventually finds its way to the surface no matter how long it's been buried. The laughter died instantly. Mr. Whitmore's hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. The entire room fell silent. Daniel's face went white, his smile faltering as the weight of my words hung in the air. And that, dear listener, was the moment everything changed. The silence after my toast was suffocating, but it wasn't born in that dining room. No, that silence had been growing for months, maybe years. You don't wake up one morning and realize your marriage is a lie. It happens slowly, like hairline cracks in a foundation. At first, you don't even notice. Then one day the whole house starts to tilt and you can't pretend it's sturdy anymore. Looking back, I can trace the first crack to something small, something so ordinary that I almost ignored it. Daniel had come home late one Tuesday, his tie loose, his hair a little too perfectly mussed. He smelled faintly of whiskey, though he swore he'd only been working late. Working late where I'd asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Conference room downtown," he said, tossing his briefcase onto the couch. "Big case. Don't wait up next time, okay?" I wanted to believe him. And for a while I did. But then the absences multiplied. Thursday nights. Saturday mornings. He had a dozen explanations, networking events, client breakfasts, unexpected calls. Every excuse plausible on its own, but together they painted a picture that made my stomach twist. Still, I told myself not to be paranoid. I was his wife. He was ambitious, focused. Surely that was all it was. But then, there was the phone. Daniel had never been precious about his phone before. It used to lie face up on the counter while he cooked pasta or scrolled mindlessly while we watched TV. Now it was glued to him, face down, pocketed the second I walked into a room. Passcode changed without warning. "What's your new code?" I asked one evening as we folded laundry together. "Why do you need it?" he countered. "I don't," I said quickly. "I just thought." "Claire." He cut me off with that practiced patience that always made me feel like a child. "It's confidential. Client stuff. You wouldn't understand." And that was another crack, the way he always framed my curiosity as ignorance, like I was some naive wife who couldn't possibly grasp the intricacies of his high-stakes world. But I wasn't naive. I was observant. And the more he dismissed me, the sharper my vision became. The second crack came at one of his company holiday parties. The room was strung with golden lights, champagne flowing freely, music soft and cheerful. Daniel looked radiant that night, basking in the glow of colleagues and compliments. He thrived on attention. It was like oxygen to him. I was chatting with one of the associates' wives when I overheard Daniel behind me. "Claire doesn't really get it," he was saying, his voice tinged with laughter. "She thinks a law firm works like one of those TV dramas. Cute, right?" They laughed. I froze. Cute. That's what I was to him. Not a partner, not a confidant, just cute. Later that night in the car, I said, "I heard what you said about me." He blinked, genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "At the party. You told them I don't get it, that I think your work is like TV dramas." He laughed again, this time at me. "Oh, that. Claire, it was a joke. Don't be so sensitive." But I wasn't being sensitive. I was seeing another crack, one that revealed how little respect he had for me. The third crack was undeniable. I found it in the form of a hotel receipt stuffed into his coat pocket. It was for a downtown suite dated on a Thursday. He'd claimed he'd been working late. My hands shook as I unfolded it, the paper crackling like a whisper of betrayal. When I confronted him, Daniel didn't flinch. It was a client meeting, he said smoothly. In a hotel room, I demanded. Conference suite, he corrected. They booked it. Not me. You think I'd be stupid enough to leave evidence lying around if I was cheating? I wanted to believe him. I really did. Because the alternative, the possibility that he was lying straight to my face, was too painful to hold. So I shoved the receipt back in his pocket and shoved the doubt deeper inside me. But the crack remained. And then came the humiliation. Daniel had always enjoyed putting me down in small ways, but those dinners, oh, those dinners were his stage. He would lace his stories with little digs at my expense, painting himself as charming and me as foolish. And everyone laughed because that's what you do in those circles. You laugh, you play along, you keep the peace. But peace built on humiliation isn't peace at all. It's surrender. So when he mocked me in front of Mr. Whitmore, when he reduced me to the role of a bumbling housewife who couldn't even cook a soufflé, I realized I was done surrendering. The cracks in our marriage weren't invisible anymore. They were gaping chasms, and I was standing on the edge, staring into the void. That night at the dinner, when I raised my glass, I wasn't just toasting to the truth. I was stepping into it. I was choosing to stop patching over cracks and instead let the whole thing collapse. Because sometimes the only way forward is through the rubble. The weeks leading up to that fateful dinner felt like watching storm clouds roll in from the horizon. At first, just a darkening sky. Then the pressure in the air. And finally, the low, distant rumble that told you something was coming, whether you were ready or not. Daniel, of course, acted like everything was normal. He slipped into his tailored suits each morning, kissed my cheek perfunctorily, and disappeared into the city. At night, he returned with that smug exhaustion reserved for men who believe their busyness proves their importance. I, on the other hand, couldn't ignore the growing dissonance. Every look, every word between us felt sharp, brittle. And under it all, my instincts kept screaming, he's hiding something. One Friday evening, about 2 weeks before the dinner, I decided to test him. He came home late as usual, his tie askew, his phone still buzzing with unread messages. How was work? I asked lightly, plating the lasagna I'd spent all afternoon on. He glanced at me distracted. Busy. The Whitmore account is eating me alive. We're finalizing terms for next quarter. Oh, I feigned ignorance, sliding the steaming dish onto the table. I heard Mr. Whitmore's been in Europe for the past month. Daniel froze mid-bite. Just a flicker, a microsecond hesitation, but enough for me to see the lie unravel. Then he smiled. His son's handling negotiations while he's gone. You know how these family firms are. Smooth. So smooth. But my pulse thudded in my ears because I knew the truth I'd checked. Mr. Whitmore hadn't left the States at all. I chewed my food slowly, nodding like I believed him, while inside my fury built another brick in the wall between us. The next crack came not at home, but at my mother's house. She'd invited us for Sunday brunch: eggs, bacon, her famous cinnamon rolls. Comfort food, the kind that sticks to your ribs. Daniel barely touched his plate. He spent the whole time scrolling his phone, firing off messages with quick, guilty thumbs. Work never sleeps, huh? My mother teased, gently pouring him more coffee. He chuckled. Unfortunately, no. Big deal on the horizon. But I saw at that flicker of a smile that didn't belong to me or my mother. It belonged to whoever was on the other end of that phone. I wanted to snatch it out of his hands, slam it onto the table, demand the truth. But I stayed silent because silence was my weapon. Silence gave me time. A week before the dinner, I overheard him on the phone late at night. His office door was closed, but voices carry in old houses. I'll see you then, he said, his voice soft, intimate. Not the clipped tone he used with clients. Not the bored tone he used with me. I pressed my ear against the cool wood, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might give me away. I can't talk now. She's home, he whispered. And that was the moment. The storm wasn't just coming. It was here. I didn't confront him right away. No, I played my part perfectly. The supportive wife. The one who smiled at his stories, nodded at his lies, and made sure his shirts were pressed for the big dinner coming up. Because Daniel had been talking about that dinner for weeks. Dinner with Mr. Whitmore, the senior partners, and a handful of associates. It's the kind of night that makes or breaks careers, he told me, his eyes gleaming with ambition. And I knew then, if he was going to humiliate me again, if he was going to use me as a prop to prop up his charm, then that would be the night I'd shatter the facade. I started preparing. I dug deeper into his world quietly, methodically. The first thing I found was a series of receipts tucked into the glove compartment of his car. Restaurants I'd never been to. Expensive ones, the kind where a single glass of wine cost more than our entire grocery bill. 2 meals, not one. Next, I checked our joint credit card statements. He'd always been meticulous about finances, but there were charges he couldn't explain away. Jewelry store purchases, boutique hotels, weekend getaways disguised as work conferences. Each piece of evidence was like thunder in my chest, warning of the lightning strike to come. And then the final nail in email accidentally synced to our shared tablet. It was short, careless, but undeniable. Last night was perfect. Can't wait until we don't have to sneak around anymore. S. I stared at that letter until my eyes blurred. Who was S.A. secretary, a colleague? Whoever she wasn't me. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just closed the tablet, set it back on the coffee table, and poured myself a glass of wine. Because if he thought he was the only one who could play games, he was wrong. That entire week I rehearsed what I would say if he tried to humiliate me again. Lines rolled through my mind as I cooked, as I showered, as I lay awake at night staring at the ceiling. What one truth could I drop that would crack his polished veneer wide open? By the time the night of the dinner arrived, I was ready. Ready to raise my glass, ready to drop my one line, ready to let the storm break. Because sometimes the only way to survive a storm is to become the lightning yourself. The night of the dinner arrived with the kind of tension that clings to your skin, prickling, impossible to shake. I dressed carefully, deliberately. A deep green silk blouse that caught the light black tailored pants hair swept into a soft knot at the nape of my neck. Not too flashy, not too demure. I wanted presence, not spectacle. Daniel hovered in the doorway as I fastened my earrings. Green, he said, brows knitting. Yes, I answered simply. He adjusted his cufflinks, smirking. It's bold. Just don't draw too much attention tonight, okay? This is important. That single sentence, so dismissive, so controlling, hardened my resolve. I smiled sweetly and slipped on my heels. Don't worry, darling, I'll be on my best behavior. The restaurant was an old downtown landmark with stained glass windows and chandeliers dripping crystal. Inside, the scent of charred steak mingled with garlic butter, the kind of aromas that instantly made your stomach rumble. Soft jazz drifted from a live trio tucked into the corner. We were led into a private dining room, a long mahogany table gleaming under warm light. At the head sat Mr. Whitmore, silver hair combed neatly, his presence commanding without a word. Around him, the other partners, their spouses, glasses of wine already in hand. Daniel was electric with charm. He clasped hands, slapped backs, laughed a little too loudly. He was the kind of man who thrived on being the center of attention. Mr. Whitmore, Daniel said, pulling out my chair before taking his seat beside me. It's an honor, truly. Claire and I have been looking forward to this all week. Mr. Whitmore nodded, his pale eyes unreadable. Let's hope it's a productive evening, Daniel. I caught the subtle edge in his tone. Perhaps he already suspected what I knew. The courses rolled out one by one. Crisp salads dressed with citrus vinaigrette, seared scallops on delicate china. A bottle of Bordeaux worth more than our monthly mortgage was uncorked, its earthy perfume filling the air. And with each glass poured, Daniel grew bolder. He told story after story about clients, about cases, about deals only he could close. But then, as always, the stories turned toward me. Claire's been trying her hand at gardening, he announced, grinning at the table. Let's just say the plants don't stand a chance. She can't keep a cactus alive. Laughter trickled around the room. I forced a polite smile, though inside my fists clenched. Oh, and you should have seen her at the firm's holiday party, Daniel continued. She got so flustered when the coat check lost her jacket she nearly cried. She's got a tender heart, my Claire. The words were sugar-coated poison dressed as affection, but meant to belittle. Mr. Whitmore's wife gave me a sympathetic look. I straightened my shoulders, returning a calm smile, because I knew my moment was coming. By the time the main course arrived, filet mignon cooked medium-rare, blood pooling just enough to glisten, the atmosphere was thick with wine and laughter. Daniel lifted his glass, the polished showman, and cleared his throat. A toast, he declared, rising to his feet. His voice boomed with confidence. To the future of Whitmore and Coer, to mentors like you, sir, who guide us, and to the sacrifices our families make so we can succeed. He gestured toward me with a flourish. My wife, especially. She tolerates my long hours, my late nights, my endless chasing of success. She's patient, loyal, and even if she can't cook or garden, she makes up for it with trying. The table chuckled. My face burned hot, but I kept my smile, fixed my hand steady as I lifted my own glass. This was it. I rose slowly, the silk of my blouse whispering against the chair. My pulse thundered in my ears, but my voice came out calm, clear. To the future, I said, raising my glass high. My eyes locked on Daniel's, and I saw his smirk falter. And to the truth that always finds its way to the surface no matter how long it's been buried. The room went silent. Forks clinked down onto plates. A server froze mid-step. Mr. Whitmore's hand slammed against the table, rattling the silverware. What did you just say, Mrs. Carter? His voice was sharp, cold. Daniel's face drained of color. Claire, sit down, he hissed under his breath. But I didn't. I slipped a slim envelope from my purse and placed it on the linen tablecloth, sliding it toward Mr. Whitmore. Inside were copies of receipts, emails, photographs, evidence of Daniel's lies, his theft, his affair. Gasps erupted around the table as Mr. Whitmore opened it. The sound of paper rustling was deafening in the silence. Daniel swayed where he stood, his glass trembling in his hand. This is nonsense, he sputtered. She doesn't know what she's talking about. But the proof was undeniable. I lowered my glass, my eyes never leaving his. To the truth, Daniel. And in that moment he collapsed back into his chair, the mask he wore for years shattering beyond repair. The air in that dining room was so thick with tension, it felt like breathing through wet cloth. Everyone stared at me, at Daniel, at the damning envelope resting in Mr. Whitmore's hands. Daniel's glass shook Bordeaux, sloshing onto the white linen tablecloth like a spreading wound. Claire, he whispered through clenched teeth, sit down. Now. But I stayed standing, glass raised, my voice steady. Here's to the man who impresses the boss with his stories at dinner. I let the silence stretch, every eye fixed on me. But pays for his lies with the company's money and another woman's lipstick on his collar. A collective gasp swept the table. One woman's hand flew to her mouth, another man coughed violently, choking on his wine. Mr. Whitmore's face darkened, veins bulging at his temple. He slammed the folder shut, his palm cracking against the mahogany table. Is this true? He barked. Daniel stammered. Sir, please. It's not what it looks like. She's confused. I interrupted, calm and deliberate. Confused, Daniel. I printed the receipts myself. The dinners, the hotel suites, and the email. Should I read it aloud, or would you prefer Mr. Whitmore do that? His composure crumbled. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, his confident grin a memory. The room moments ago filled with laughter and clinking glasses was dead silent. The faint jazz from the next room seemed absurdly cheerful, out of place in this sudden arena of judgment. Mr. Whitmore slowly rose from his chair, his gaze icy. You've been stealing from this company, using our resources for this. He tossed the envelope onto the table, its contents spilling out like ashes. Daniel reached for the papers with trembling hands, desperate to contain them. "It's not theft, it's expenses misunderstood." "Misunderstood," Mr. Whitmore thundered. "Do you take me for a fool?" The silverware rattled as his fist hit the table again. I could feel every pair of eyes on me, some wide with shock, others narrowed with judgment, still others lit with the kind of guilty fascination people reserve for scandals that don't touch them personally. Daniel collapsed into his chair, his face gray, his body sagging like air let out of a balloon. He looked small, pathetic. Nothing like the man who had strutted in here earlier, brimming with arrogance. For a moment I almost pitied him. Almost. Because I remembered every cruel joke, every dismissal, every time he'd used me as his punchline. I remembered the receipt in his coat pocket, the lies whispered through closed doors, the humiliation I'd swallowed again and again. This wasn't revenge. This was truth finally stepping out from the shadows. And truth has teeth. The dinner disintegrated. Conversations broke out in sharp, hushed tones. Chairs scraped against the floor as some executives excused themselves. The spouses exchanged glances, some sympathetic, some smug. Mr. Whitmore leaned close to Daniel, his voice low but sharp enough for us all to hear. "We'll deal with this on Monday. Don't bother coming into the office until you hear from me." Daniel tried to protest, but his words dissolved into incoherent mutters. I sat down calmly, sipping the last of my wine, letting the silence speak for me. On the ride home, the city lights blurred through the windshield as Daniel gripped the steering wheel hard enough that his knuckles blanched. His jaw was clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Finally, he hissed, "What the hell were you thinking? You ruined me." I stared out the window, my reflection pale against the glass. "No, Daniel. You ruined yourself. I just stopped covering for you." "You made me look like a fool in front of Whitmore," he spat. I turned, meeting his wild eyes. "You are a fool. And now everyone knows it." He slammed his fist against the dashboard, the sound echoing in the confined space. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid. When we got home, he stormed into his office, slamming the door behind him. I stood in the quiet kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I poured myself another glass of wine, leaned against the counter, and let the reality settle over me. The facade was gone. The truth was out. And Daniel's world was crumbling. For years, he had humiliated me in private and in public. Tonight, for the first time, the humiliation wasn't mine. The storm had broken, but the real fallout was only just beginning. The morning after the dinner, I woke to silence. No clinking of Daniel's coffee cup, no murmur of the news channel he always switched on while knotting his tie. Just silence, heavy and unnatural. When I patted down the hall, I found him sitting in the kitchen, still wearing yesterday's wrinkled shirt. His eyes were bloodshot, hair unkempt, and in front of him lay a half-empty glass of whiskey, though the sun had barely risen. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You destroyed me." His voice was hoarse, ragged. I leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "No, Daniel. You destroyed yourself. I just stopped pretending." That was the truth he couldn't swallow. For years, I'd been the buffer, the one who smoothed over his arrogance, laughed at his cruel jokes, filled the silences he left behind. And without that buffer, the world saw him exactly as he was. The calls began that afternoon. First from colleagues, curt, cautious voices checking to see if the rumors were true. Then from his parents, his father's voice sharp with shame, his mother's trembling with disappointment. "Daniel," his father barked through the receiver, "what have you done? Your career, your reputation ruined." Daniel muttered excuses, but the words held no weight. By evening, Mr. Whitmore himself called. I could hear his booming voice even from across the room. "You won't step foot in this office again. The board will meet Monday to discuss termination and legal proceedings. Pray, your wife doesn't take those receipts to the authorities." Daniel hung up with shaking hands, his face a sickly shade of gray. The fallout seeped into our personal lives, too. Our children grown away at college called within days, their voices filled with confusion and hurt. Mom, is it true? Dad's been stealing. I didn't sugarcoat it. Your father made choices. Now he's facing the consequences. On the other end of the line, silence. Then a broken whisper. I don't know how to look at him the same way. That cut deeper than anything Daniel could have said. Not because it hurt me, but because I saw in his eyes that it gutted him. For once, his arrogance couldn't shield him from the truth. The community followed quickly. Neighbors who once waved with warm smiles now avoided eye contact. At the grocery store, I caught whispers trailing behind me. That's her. The wife who exposed him. The woman whose husband stole from his company. Some pitied me, others admired me. But Daniel, he became a pariah. Invitations to golf outings vanished. Friends stopped calling. Even his so-called work buddies evaporated. Without his career, without his image, he was nothing to them. One night, a week after the dinner, he finally snapped. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us. Suddenly, he turned on me, eyes wild. Why couldn't you just keep quiet? Do you have any idea what you've done to me? I set down my book, meeting his fury with calm. Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To us. Every lie you told, every cruel joke, every dollar you stole, it was never about me destroying you. You lit the fire yourself. I just opened the window so everyone could see the smoke. He opened his mouth, but no words came. Just the heaving of his chest, the sound of a man who realized he had no defense left. Within 2 months, the divorce papers were signed. He fought, of course, accused me of betrayal, of conspiring against him. But the evidence was on my side. The court awarded me the house, the savings, even part of his dwindling retirement fund. Daniel moved into a rented apartment on the far side of town, stripped of everything he once flaunted. At work, whispers told me he'd been blacklisted. No firm would touch him. Too much baggage. Too much shame. For me, life didn't become easier overnight. Walking into that office was its own gauntlet. Some colleagues looked at me with respect, others with suspicion. But one thing was certain, they no longer dismissed me. Even Mr. Whitmore, stern as he was, stopped me in the hallway one day. Mrs. Carter, he said, voice gruff, you did the right thing. Men like your husband, they think charm can cover rot. You reminded us it can't. It wasn't praise exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement after years of invisibility felt like oxygen. At night, when I lay in bed alone, I sometimes wondered if I'd done the right thing. I thought about the years we shared, the children we raised, the laughter we once had. But then I remembered the humiliation, the way he looked at me like I was nothing but decoration, a prop to prop up his ego. And I knew the marriage had ended long before the dinner. That night was just the burial. But the fallout wasn't just his ruin, it was my rebirth. Because once the dust settled, once the shame no longer pressed down on me, I realized something terrifying and liberating. For the first time in decades, I was free. 6 months passed. Seasons turned, leaves fell, snow dusted the sidewalks, and the city marched on as though nothing had happened. But for me, everything had changed. Daniel was gone, at least from my life. He'd moved into a cramped apartment across town. Rumor had it he was struggling to pay rent, his savings bled dry by legal fees and mounting debts. I'd hear whispers occasionally, someone saw him at a bar. Someone else spotted him applying for a job far beneath the career he once boasted about. The mighty had fallen, and this time no one was rushing to catch him. As for me, life was quieter, lighter. For the first time in decades, I had mornings to myself, no frantic rush to iron his shirts, no late night waiting for the sound of his key in the lock. I poured my coffee in silence, savoring the rich aroma, and felt no guilt in enjoying it alone. At work, the shift was undeniable. People who once brushed me aside now paused to ask my opinion. Some did it out of curiosity, others out of respect. And when Mr. Whitmore called me into his office one gray January morning, I braced for bad news. But instead he leaned forward, fingers steepled, and said, "Claire, we'd like to promote you. Director of Human Resources. You've proven you have backbone. This company needs that." For a moment I couldn't speak. Tears pricked my eyes, not from sadness, but from the realization that I had stepped into a future Daniel had always chased, but never earned. I accepted. The first day in my new office, I sat behind the heavy oak desk, running my hand across its polished surface. Daniel had always craved this kind of authority, but all his shortcuts, his lies, his arrogance, had only led to his downfall. And here I was, quiet, underestimated Claire, claiming it not through deception, but through truth. It was a strange kind of victory. Not loud, not triumphant, just steady, solid, undeniable. Of course there were nights when loneliness crept in, when the house felt too big, the bed too empty. But instead of mourning what I'd lost, I learned to cherish what I'd gained: peace, dignity, the knowledge that I could stand on my own. I thought of my children often. They'd struggled with the truth at first, but slowly they came to me one by one with words that healed wounds I hadn't realized were still raw. "Mom," my daughter whispered during one visit, "you're stronger than I ever knew. You did what I couldn't have." And in that moment I realized the legacy I was leaving them wasn't shame, it was courage. Sometimes in quiet moments I replayed that night, the clink of my glass, the weight of my words, the way the room fell silent. I remembered Daniel's face, drained of its smugness, stripped bare. And I didn't feel guilt. I felt justice. Because he had humiliated me for years, in small ways, in big ways, in ways that chipped at my soul until I barely recognized myself. And that night I reclaimed my voice. He humiliated me in front of the boss I thought, staring out my office window at the city skyline. But in the end, the truth humiliated him in front of the world. So if you're listening, if you've ever felt small, dismissed, invisible, remember this: silence protects no one but the liar. And truth, though it may cost you comfort, will set you free. Don't be afraid to raise your glass. Don't be afraid to say the one line that changes everything. And if my story resonates with you, if you've walked through your own fire or know someone who has shared this story, subscribe for more. And most of all, don't forget you are stronger than the lies told about you. Because sometimes from the ashes of betrayal comes the power of becoming yourself again.